In this episode we're going to do stages 2 and 2-1. We're going to create the second deck, we're going to sand it, varnish it, and then fit it to the false keel. Okay, for this stage we're going to need 2 pieces 16, and you can see that they're absolutely identical, but obviously you've got you can't put them like that. They need to be either like that or like that. It doesn't seem to make a difference which way round they go. And what I've done is I've taken them off the sprues in the normal way, and I've just filed off the little marks, and then you're going to need some veneer strips. Now it does state that the veneer strips measure I've lost it now, 0.5 by 4 by 300 mil. So there aren't anything else that looks anything like this, but I'm going to measure them anyway. So we can see there that that's about 0.4, 0.5 ish, and it's about 4 mil. There we go, 3.9. I mean, these aren't the most accurate calipers in the world. And if I put them on the cutting mat, obviously you can't see all of the cutting mat, but this line there is 30 centimeters, which is obviously 300 millimeters. Now I've done a quick check, and it looks like you're going to need 15 strips for each side. So I've got 30 strips ready. In fact, I might even get 32 ready. I can always put them back if I don't need it. So where this is eventually going to go on our ship, we're going to be building a second deck there, and I'm doing a little test fit, and that's going to go into there. We've got 2 lines there, we've got a little shelf there that we've built, this piece there, which I think is piece number 6, it's got a little notch on the end. You see there's a little hole there. Now this is a very stiff fit. It might be because I haven't got these in exactly 90 degrees. It might just be they're not quite cut. I don't think it's because they're not cut right, but this will need a little bit of a manipulation. Piece number 6, and there you go, that goes in fine. So we know that the final piece we're going to deal with is going to fit. This hole there doesn't seem to be, there we go, so it's going to need pushing down a little bit. So what I'm going to do, we're going to be sticking the strips of veneer right across. We're then going to cut from the underside, because obviously where we're going to stick the strips across like that, that's going to cover those holes up. So from the bottom we'll cut them out, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just place the strips of veneer on just ever so slightly overlapping, and then that way when we come to put them in we can measure it, and we can just take a little bit down. This is kind of the opposite of baking cakes, whereas with cooking they say you can always add but you can't take away. With this it's more a case of you can take away but you can't add. So that's how I'm going to approach this. Okay, so the way I'm going to make a start on this is, so that I don't get them muddled up, I put a tiny B on the bottom. I don't know if you can see that. I've done it in pencil. There we go. So I had already got them in a muddle, so I put a little B on the bottom to indicate that it's the bottom. It can all easily be rubbed off if it turns out I shouldn't. So what I'm going to do, the instructions say to stick the veneer strips on, but I think the easiest way to do it is once the first veneer strip is on, we'll actually be able to push this second one in place like so. Let me bring the camera in a little bit closer, well, a lot closer actually. But you see, obviously until the glue is stuck, I'll be able to push that first veneer strip off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick just the one veneer strip onto each, and then I'm going to leave it to dry for at least a couple of hours, and then I'll come back to it and continue. So like I said, I want a little overlap, so what I'm going to do with the aid of two clamps, I'm going to clamp the strips on like so. I don't want a really heavy clamp because I want to be able to just shift this about, and then what I want to do is get something fairly thin, so I'll use my ruler and then I'll just position that so that it's just ever slightly overlapping. So that's now too much, so we need to just bring that down in a bit. Too much. There we go. Okay, and then what I'll do is I'll just mark that with a pencil. This will be covered up with the veneer strips, and then that will give me a guide of where to stick the veneer. There we go. So when I come to stick it, well, what I'll do is I'll actually put glue onto this panel, and then that can go onto there like so. And then I'll do the same with this one. They don't have to be the same distance, they just need to, in fact actually I'm going to bring that down even further. There we go. Happy with that. Right, so we'll just mark this one. There we go, nice little line across there. Like so, okay. Okay, so when we're gluing this, what I found when I did the workstation was where I slapped glue on, there was blobs of glue everywhere. We really don't want this. We want to keep the glue really, really thin. So what I'm going to do is I've got a little, this is a waste piece of plastic, but you can use a paint palette, anything you want. And we're going to just pop the glue into the palette. I do actually have new glue coming, so in a future video you will see a different pot, and I'm going to apply it with a paintbrush. And the good thing about wood glue is that it has a good working time. So what I would propose here is, if the glue is white, you've put too much on. So we're just going to paint a little bit of glue on. Apologise if you can't see this. There we go. So I'll just put a little bit less on there, and we'll bring the veneer strip on. And I like to try and save as much as I can, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the end of the veneer strip close to the end. There we go. And then what I'll do is I will clamp that. That will push that down onto the wood, and then hopefully, if we've done that correctly, excuse the odd clamps, and then that will hold that down until it glues. I think we haven't quite got enough on the end there. That's not going to be a problem. There we go. So, and I'll leave that for about an hour, and then we'll just double check it. So what we'll do is we'll do the second one, and then this will give us a little start point. So when we do the rest of the veneer strips, we can actually push the veneer strips into the first one, and then we'll push the third one into the second one, and so on and so forth. I've gone a little bit over that line there, but I don't think it's going to be a major problem. So there we go. So we get our veneer strip. Doesn't matter which way round we go, where the ends are. We'll just pop that onto the end like so. And it's like most things, if you have a good start, it'll make the last bit a lot easier. and I've run out of small clamps, so I'm going to have to use... This is going to be overkill, but it'll do the job perfectly. I did have some more small clamps, but I can't seem to find them at the moment. But as I say, it does the job. It's just these are big clamps. They're a little bit overkill. So there we go. Oh, now that veneer strip has slipped. There we go. So we'll check that in about an hour. Hopefully it would have stuck quite fast. So these have now dried for about an hour, and what I've done is I've just checked them. I just give them a gentle push just to make sure they are stuck down. One of them didn't quite stick in the edges. That's okay. So what I did is I just lifted it up, popped a little bit of glue, popped another clamp on it and left it. But once they're stuck down properly, we can then get on with it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to record myself doing this and then speed it up. But what we're going to do is we're going to apply a thin layer of glue. We're then going to push a veneer strip onto there like so, as tight as we can to the previous one, and then we'll get the next one and we'll push that one on, and then we will continue going all the way down until the whole thing is covered. And then it'll be a little bit problematic there because we've only got a little bit, so obviously we'll glue that on sort of at an angle. In fact, what I'll probably do is I'll cut a little bit off. Now this piece is more than half of the length of the veneer. Let me just move the camera, sorry, I do apologise. So yeah, this piece is actually, as you can see, two of them is longer than the veneer, so we are going to be able to reuse these veneer strips. Obviously if these veneer strips were like twice the length of this, we could cut it off and then use the next one, but that's not going to be a problem. So yeah, so I'll crack on with that and I'll show you when I'm done. Okay, so these are my my pieces with the veneer strips. Really happy with this. Now I've been looking at the instructions. Like, I always look a couple of stages ahead, and it probably sounds a bit daft now, but it does say that you need to sand the top. Now that I've glued these veneer strips on, I can understand why these aren't quite level. They're not going to need a lot of sanding, but they will need some. So what I'm going to do, I need to match these veneer strips with the shape of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut everything off as close as I can to the original piece. These I'm going to cut as long as I can, because you never know, if I cut these long they might be useful for another stage. You know, if I need to put veneer strips on something, say this wide, I can then reuse those. Now in most cases I'm going to be cutting across the grain, which is going to be easy to cut. Some of the pieces, say here, I'm going to be cutting along the grain, so I'm going to run the risk of it splitting. But I'm not going to go right up close. We'll see how it goes. So I'll probably end up leaving a little gap between the original, and then what I need to do then is sand it down so that the whole lot comes out. This bit will look this shape, but obviously with veneer strips on. So yeah, that should be fairly straightforward. The sanding is going to need to be careful, and what I also anticipate, in fact I did find one area, some of these may not have been stuck down properly. I think there's a bit here, there's a piece here, it's just starting to come off, so I need to just be wary of that. And what I'll need to do is just pull that up and then just apply a little bit more glue and then push it down. There was one actually I did off camera, I think it was this one. Yeah, this one had come off. I didn't get the glue right to the edge, and off camera I just lifted it and popped a little bit of glue in. So any parts that need re-gluing, I will do that after I've cut the strips. So I'll record myself doing this and I'll play it back quickly. So obviously it doesn't take ages. I don't know how long it's going to take, but obviously I don't want to bore you with this for hours. Okay, so the next stage is to just give these a gentle sand. They're not quite level, so you just need to give a gentle sand, and we'll just go over it like so, and then that will just do it until it's just nice and level. Okay, so quite an interesting stage next. What we're going to do is, I'm using a propelling pencil, but you're either using a sharp pencil or a propelling pencil. What you want to do is gently run your pencil along in between the veneer strips. This is, I suppose, this is going to give the illusion of a little bit of weathering. But then what you want to do is slightly trickier stage next. Starting from this line here, what we want to do is on every single veneer strip we want to be putting two dots. This is going to represent nail heads, and we're going to run that line all the way along there, and again another line all the way along there. Then we're going to do another line 34mm, so that's going to be round about there all the way along. That should leave us with a gap of 30mm there, so we could actually start from the end rather than going 34 in there. And then we also want one halfway between, which is 34mm, and that should give us the halfway point, and that should give us a gap of 37mm from the end, which it roughly does. So I'll get on with those then, running the lines across there. We'll run a line across there and there, one down there, and then one down there. Oh, so it's been really hard work so far. What we need, we've got 2 more stages left of this this build. Sorry, of this video. What we're going to do is we're going to varnish these veneer strips that we've just rubbed down. I've made sure that they're all level. I've done a little dry fit off camera. I did make a couple of mistakes earlier on. But I managed to rub it out with the sandpaper. So I'm going to do this slightly differently. The way I've always painted using the miniature style, which is nice thin paints, watered down, and lots of layers. But I actually have a problem with varnish in that if you're using gloss varnish, which I'm using a Vallejo here. Other gloss varnishes are obviously available, but the problem I have with the gloss varnish is that I actually can't tell when it's dry or not, whereas a matte varnish you can. So if you apply a first coat of gloss varnish, wait for it to dry, then you apply another coat, you can't tell because gloss varnish looks wet. So what I tend to do is I will do my 3 coats through the rain. So I'll do a coat of that matte varnish, and that will seal the wood in. A satin varnish will give a slightly different finish, and then I will finish off with a gloss varnish, and then if I do need another coat I will put another gloss varnish over the top. But that should give it a super shiny finish. What I'm also going to do, this is a piece of scrap wood. So when I come to do the varnishes, when I do the matte varnish, I'm going to paint 3/4 of it with the matte varnish. Then when we do the satin varnish, I'm going to do half of it, and then I'm going to do a gloss. So you'll actually be able to see the difference with the finishes. So what's extremely important is a really clean brush. The quality isn't so as important, but it must be clean. If, for example, because this is obviously clear, and we want it to be clear. If, for example, I've painted red with this in the past and I've not quite cleaned the brush, when I come to paint, it's going to pick up that red and it's going to stain all of this, whatever colour is on the brush. So if you can get away with it, use a brand new brush, but obviously we don't all have that luxury. So I'm using this as actually waste product for my paint palette, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of matte varnish like so, and I'm going to apply, well, normally I would use water. You can use tap water if you're a bit of a purist. You can use distilled water. I actually use deionized water as well, which is the stuff that you can buy from garages that you put in your car radiator. But today I'm trying out this new product. I got this via Acid Drop. They do a monthly paint thing, and in this one you get Insta. This is from Insta. This is called Water Plus. I actually have a recipe for what I call magic water, which is water with a little bit of retarder medium and some flow aid, and it just improves the painting quality. I suspect this is going to be exactly the same, but this is actually a first test for me. So I'm going to dilute this varnish roughly 50-50, It's better to over thin than under thin, and as you can see this is quite gloopy, but once you thin it down you see you get a nice thin consistency. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint as thin as we can. Whoops, I've just dropped a piece. Right, we're going to paint as thin as we can, and we're just going to go over the veneer strips, and where you can just section them off and try to keep this in one direction, because if it does pick up any stains it's going to run them along then rather than across. And if you see any globules in the corner, just make sure you mop them up with a brush. Just so there's a little bit there, so what I'll do is I'll just carry on painting just to get rid of some more of the varnish, and I can just mop that up. And then because this is thin, this should dry a little bit quicker. And as you can see, I've not put enough varnish in my palette. That's absolutely fine. We didn't know how much we would need, so now I can make a good estimate of how much we will need. And like I say, this is only an estimate. It doesn't have to be scientific measurements, but if you're not 100% sure, add a little bit more water. Obviously if you've been painting for so many years or days or months, you kind of get to know the feel of it. So I'm going to carry on doing this, and this is kind of acting as a sealer. So this is sealing the wood, we hope. And we'll keep it nice and thin. If you find you put a bit too much on it, you can't really see it, but obviously it's going to go shiny where it's wet, and you don't want to paint too thick. There's a little trick that I was taught. If you get bubbles, it means that you're painting too fast. And what I'm trying to do is just spread this out. The first coat is going to be difficult because it's trying to soak into the wood. When we come to do subsequent coats, that wood will obviously be sealed, so it's going to stick to the varnish underneath rather than trying to soak into the wood. And I've just turned this away from me because I like to paint. I'm right-handed, obviously. I like to paint away from me. And then just for this first coat at least, make sure I get the sides, but when I come to do the edges, I don't want to end up painting the top again. So first time I painted wood with varnish, it was some very helpful viewers of mine on Twitch. We were doing a forest troll, and someone suggested to me to use an MDF base, and I said, well, I don't actually like MDF bases, and isn't MDF just an absorbent wood? And they persuaded me to give it a try, but rather than applying paint straight onto it, they told me to use varnish and then paint over the varnish. Otherwise obviously the paint would just soak straight in, and I tell you what, it was absolutely amazing. So I'm just going to leave that to dry for a bit. It shouldn't take long. Most of that is pretty. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, you can see some shiny areas. Once that shine disappears, then you know it's dry. So what I'll do while I'm waiting is I will paint this waste piece. So I'm going to paint. Oh, I actually meant to paint 3/4 of it, but that's alright. So we'll stop about there. In fact, I'll tell you what. Let's do it properly, shall we? That's half. That's about 2/3. So we'll paint that. And then what I'll do is I will get on with the next piece, and I reckon by the time we've painted this one will be dry and it'll be ready for the satin varnish. So I've allowed this to dry. It actually took about an hour, a lot longer than I thought, and that was because the wood felt a little bit damp. I've never painted on this kind of wood before, so obviously you need to judge it. As I say, I left it for about an hour, and what I've also because it's so thin, you can still feel the individual pieces of wood, so that means you haven't made it too thick. So what I've done here, I did actually record a bit before and it went wrong. I've got my satin varnish, and this is so that I can tell the difference between the parts that I've done and the parts I haven't. It'll become clear later. So what I've done is I've got my scrap piece of wood here, and you see I've made little marks on it. This is just to tell me the various stages. So after I've mixed my varnish, I'm just going to paint half. This isn't part of the build, but what this will do, when we've finished, we'll be able to see the difference between bare wood, matte varnish, satin varnish, and the last bit will be gloss. As you can see, you can't tell an awful lot of difference between the matte and the unvarnished, but the satin you will see a little coat. So what we're going to do now is we're going to paint all of this exactly the same as we did before, only this time we're using satin varnish. And remember, you see here I've really thinned my varnish down. I may actually have thinned this too much, but that's absolutely fine. If you thin the paints too much, you just need to apply an extra coat. If you don't thin it enough, you'll get a terrible finish. So this is going to have a total of 3 to 4 coats on when we're finished. So this really thin layer, that's absolutely fine. You see how you can hardly see it on there. So I'm going to get on with that and do another coat. Okay, so what I've done off camera is I've just painted this last quarter with the gloss. As you see, you can't see a lot of difference between bare and matte. You can't see much difference between matte and satin. Now the gloss, I'm trying to just get, let me see if I can just turn this light out. Right, you can see a little bit of shine. It doesn't show as much shine. There we go. Yeah, you can see a little bit of shine, but not too much. So I'm looking at this and I'm wondering if it's going to be enough. So it might be that this might need a 4th coat. But what we'll do is we'll pop the gloss coat on. We'll let it dry. This is dry. This is not actually taken quite so long to dry, but that's because it's, rather than painting it onto bare wood, this time what we've done is we've painted it onto, let's call it paint, although it's varnish. So that's been left probably about half an hour until it feels like it's definitely dry. It's got a slightly nicer finish to it. We can still feel the individual wood strips, but what we'll do is we'll go over that with the gloss, and then we'll see what it looks like in the morning. Sorry, we'll see what it looks like when it's dry, but it definitely is glossy. But it might, I mean, that might be that I've over thinned it. But we'll see how we get on. Okay, so this is my finished deck. Now I did put an extra coat of varnish on it. I wasn't happy with the shine, so I think that might be because I was varnishing onto wood. I've never used wood before. I think possibly I didn't let it dry quite enough. I didn't let it soak in. I don't know, but you can see the finished result there is really, really shiny. So there's the other one. You can still make out the marks that I've put in. So I'm really happy with that. So what we need to do next is attach this to the false keel. So this is our deck. So first thing we need to do is do a test fit, and obviously we need the notch. There's a notch there, and there's a notch there and there, and obviously this is a corresponding one. Now what I have found is when you put this one in, this is obviously the way I've done it. It's it could work out differently from you guys. This is slightly wonky, just ever so slightly. So what I'm needing to do is to pop a clamp in there. So it means it's a little bit awkward. And the other thing I've noticed might make it easier, lift the ends up, the middle, sorry, of the deck, so that when you've got the two deck pieces in, you can just push the middles down together, like so, so that when you are putting the second one in, it's not scraping across the first one and pulling the veneer off. So this, once it's glued, this clamp is going to hold along the bottom, and then we're just going to gently clamp that down, just like so. And then the main clamps that are going to do the work is this one that's positioned on the end, just on the very end there, and that's going to just try to pull this deck back a little bit, like so. And then this one is actually going to sit on the support, not on the actual deck, and what that will therefore do is pull this one down a bit. So it's just ever so slightly, then we loosen off this one, and that's how I'm going to clamp it. So that's my practice clamp. It looks a bit dodgy at the moment, but obviously once it's all glued it should line up. I don't believe I'm going to need this to be 100% accurate, because there are going to be hatch covers going over there. But that's fine. I'm happy with that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 glue points. There's the keel across there, 1, 2, 3, and the shelf along there, and then there's one across the middle. What I'm going to do, I'm going to put glue almost to the edges, so that the glue, as you put it on, obviously the glue is going to squeeze, so it's not all going to squeeze into a visible place, and I think that will work rather well. Okay, so that is now finished. All that's left for me now is to leave that for about 24 hours. I've made sure every single possible part was stuck down to a point of contact. I did notice, I might not be able to show you, this part there, right in the middle of the screen now, that wasn't actually touching the little shelf, and I noticed that once I just manoeuvred it round and just pushed it down a bit, suddenly everything fitted so much better. Still a little tiny bit out, that's probably down to my inexperience as a modeler, but I'm absolutely confident with a file, and you know, some of the hatches are going to be a little bit bigger. I don't know why we bothered, but maybe the hole is there to guide where things like the hatches will go, but I'm really happy with that. And yeah, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to leave that for 24 hours. In fact, actually I'm going to leave it for a week, because that's the end of the video. So next week we'll carry on doing some more work with it. I believe, and don't quote me on this, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing some of the sanding along the sides, and then we're going to start to put some planks in along the sides, and then we're going to prepare it then for the gun turrets. So okay, so I'll see you next week.